My name is Nasser Mashni. I'm a first generation Australian Palestinian. My father was a Nakba survivor. He was born in the early 20s in Palestine, in Deir Daboyan, but grew up in Jerusalem in the 20s and 30s. He lived a unique Palestinian experience in that he was uh, born just after the British conquest of Palestine, the British Mandate starting, and matured and lived in almost a free Palestine. I say almost because whilst Balfour had been signed, whilst the British were complicit with the incoming Zionists, for much of his childhood, he wasn't really aware of just how despicably the Palestinians were about to be betrayed. And so as a child, he ran through the old city of Jerusalem and matured in a space and an understanding of the beauty of Jerusalem. Jew, Muslim, Christian, they were all Palestinian. And, in fact, I just issued a Passover message to our Jewish brothers and sisters. And I recalled a story in that. And I said, Dad said the best thing about growing up in Jerusalem was it was always Eid for somebody. It was Eid for the Christians or Eid for the Muslims or Eid for the Jews. And, if it was Eid, you just got fed. You went from somebody's house to somebody's house, whether they were Christian, Muslim, or Jew. We just it was Christmas or, Easter or Iftar or whatever. You just got fed. And nobody
Yeah.
said, you're not a Christian, you're not a Muslim, you're not a Jew. We were family, and that was the Palestine he grew up in. And, the stories he used to tell about, and I've adapted it a little bit in the conversations I had, but it was Abraham, Avraham, and Ibrahim played marbles together Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. On Friday, Ibrahim went to mosque. On Saturday, Avraham went to temple. On Sunday, Abraham went to church. And if you know Jerusalem, you've been to Jerusalem, the Wailing Wall is there. The Dome of the Rock is here. And the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is there. The holiest site for Jews, the third holiest site for Muslims, and the first Kaaba, and where the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven, and where Christ was crucified. All of them are less than 400 meters apart as the crow flies. But on Monday, Abraham, Avraham, and Ibrahim, the founder of the Abrahamic religions in Arabic, Hebrew, and English, played marbles together. And this was Palestine as he knew it. And why our entire lives we grew up believing that that's the Palestine we must aspire to. And whilst everybody was talking about, and continues today, to speak about this notion of two states, we never ever believed in two states, but that noble land, that land of prophets, that land of noble people would never be cut, that every one of Abraham's children should live there free. And anyone who thinks they're better, anyone that believes they have a superior right to that land, they either cede that superiority or they leave.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with what you said. I myself, if you may forgive me, I guess I had, because I suppose this is the norm when Palestinians talk to each other, the conversation immediately goes to like, what's the background?
Yeah.
My father's side, my grandparents from my father's side were exiled from the former village of Tantura in northern Palestine.
Yeah.
And from my mother's side, grandparents from my mother's side, they were former Palestinian notables during the Ottoman Empire, which even after the Ottoman Empire collapsed, wealth didn't go away immediately.
Mhm.
They were from Haifa, like the old city in Haifa. And obviously, the Nakba happened. that what status you had almost became irrelevant, and you simply fled. From my father's side, they fled to Lebanon, and they became Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, which my dad, despite working all across the world, kept that refugee document until he died. So that's its own thing. He never gained another citizenship or any citizenship. From my mother's side, they initially fled to Lebanon, then they went to Jordan and became naturalized Jordanian citizens. I am neither of these things. I had the misfortune of any Western country to be born in, being specifically the United States. So I'm a US citizen. A misfortune, especially in this current context. And yeah, that's the general gist of it. And something that I remember like having it told to me, especially when I was reading through like Haifa's cosmopolitan and heterogeneous identity as a coastal city, being sort of like a bastion of like Palestinian like academic like a Palestinian academic center alongside Jaffa and of course Jerusalem. Uh, it just struck me that like it doesn't feel, it feels like Zionism came and irreversibly broke the order that existed to the point where you can't even picture like the original order in a lot of ways. There are people, of course, who would want to get along and live in that heterogeneous society again. Most Palestinians do. But it's simply a matter of like, how do you get to that point, so to speak, and how do you
There's a
reverse it?
process to it for him. So,
Mhm.
my professional space is finance and property in Australia, and in particular in Melbourne. And there's a lot of South Africans, a lot of South African Jews who have migrated to Australia. Australia and South Africa, sit in the Southern Hemisphere, and in fact, are very British in sporting codes, in settler colonies, etc. So it's normal for South Africans to come here. And it was normal for South Africans to come here in the 70s. Yeah. And it was normal for South Africans to come here in the 80s. We got a lot of South Africans that came in the late 90s. And they were all the South Africans that left South Africa after Nelson Mandela got out of jail. Yeah. And, just very quickly offhand, when I'd see these people, I'd say, oh, you're South African, from their accent. You can tell from their accent. And yeah. So, how long have you been here? And they'd say 4 years or 5 years. And you could work out that that was 98. Say,
Mhm.
oh, 98 was no good anymore, was it? What do you mean? Well, after Nelson Mandela got out of jail and became president, apartheid left. Apartheid was gone. You couldn't have stayed any longer. I understand it. Not like the good days. What do you mean? I said, come on. You're not going to tell me that you left South Africa in 1998 because economic opportunities, because the weather was no good. You left in 1998 because, suddenly you didn't have your superiority anymore.
Yeah.
No, I was always against apartheid. If
They
you're
all
against
say that.
apartheid, if you're against apartheid, you leave in 77, you live in 88, you leave in 93. You don't leave in 96, yeah, or 98. So there will be a lot of anti-Zionist Jews that will live in Belgium, that will live in the United States, that will live in the United Kingdom, and they will live all over the place. And they will be the ones with wealth, yeah. And there will be many Palestinian Jews, because that's what it will be in the future, who will still harbor supremacist ideologies, but a generation or two or three later, that will have been bred out of them. And you only have to look at the heroism of the South Africans who, in 2 generations went from apartheid and Nelson Mandela being imprisoned and solitary confinement in Robben Island. In just two, almost three generations, these proud people were at the forefront of taking Israel to the International Court of Justice. They expelled their ambassador. The foreign minister has unwaveringly, with all the pressure that the United States has exerted on South Africa, both directly and indirectly through its allies, has not bent to know that there is such a thing as a post-apartheid life. There is such a thing. And the model has been set. The model has been set. The same too, Sahel, has to be held. We should hold the same standard to our own people. To our own people. Muslim, Christian, Druze, Bedouin, whatever. If they think that they're better than a Jewish person, that's unacceptable too.
I mean, I completely agree. Like, this was something we actually like talked about like in private in ODSI, where we were like, there was this conversation and it was like, obviously, because when Israel hopefully is dismantled, there will be a lot of Israelis who will grab their bags and leave. And the question then becomes, oh, do those people become eligible for Palestinian citizenship? And it's not like a matter of whether or not they're eligible. They will not take it because
Correct.
what they had, the settler colonial privileges that they had, the idea of no longer being a settler, but being like an equal citizen, that is the part they wanted to keep, so to speak.
Yeah. They want the citizenship that allows them to be the thumb.
Yeah.
As soon as that is removed from them, they don't want that citizenship
anymore. I have like a list of points that I have to like go through to ask you. What is the work that APAN does in Australia?
So I'm the current president of the Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network. This is its 15th year for the Australian-Palestine Advocacy Network. It's the peak representative body in Australia of all of the solidarity groups, unions, churches, Jewish solidarity groups that want to work for and advocate for justice for the Palestinians. So it's a representative body that it's made up of organizations. We've got the largest union in Australia is one of our members, yeah. As well as a couple of thousand individual members as well. So membership is open to anyone in Australia as well as any organization in Australia, as long as they agree with our principles. We work in a number of different channels, from community engagement, that's elevating the status of our community, elevating the understanding of community of Palestine, lobbying, which is lobbying to unions, to churches, to state and federal parliaments, as well as local councils, to advocacy with media as well as politicians, to we do things like movement building. We've got a BDS coordinator. We've got a campaigner that organizes our campaigns. On May 10, 11, and 12, we've got a 3-day conference where we'll have 250 activists from all over Australia and New Zealand converging in one spot for 3 days, where we will be coordinating the next year's worth of activities. So look, we're a very robust organization with processes and organization. The board is majority Palestinian and majority female, in fact, as well. We have a Jewish member of our board. We have a former senator, Australian senator on our board, some professional Australians, and somehow I became president. So alhamdulillah, it's a very, I would argue, amongst the best in the world for its output, the size of it, for its efficacy, but also its organizational structure and what we've been able to achieve. I'm not sure if there's a way for viewers of the program, perhaps we can put the website apan.org.au, but people who might be watching this podcast can go to our website apan.org.au and just have a look at some of our work. There's a significant bulk of work that's happened there.
What gives you hope, so to speak, about the ongoing outflow of support for us Palestinians vis-a-vis our liberation and hopefully ability to have our right of return one day, inshallah?
Inshallah. Sahel, you spoke earlier on about, the misfortune of having a US citizenship. The misfortune, as I understand it, somebody who's got Australian citizenship, is that we are the least connected to Palestine. I've got a video, it's pinned on my Instagram, where I talk about the 8 types of Palestinian. And the number 1 Palestinian, you and I are the number 1 Palestinian. In fact, I think I'm a triple A Palestinian. You're only a double A Palestinian. And I'll tell you why. Although my voice is a little bit croaky, I've just come from a protest. A triple A Palestinian is because I'm Western born with a Western citizenship that can't be stripped of me. And as far as a Palestinian goes, with respect to ability to travel and what that looks like, that's the highest form on earth of freedom for a Palestinian. And so that's AAA. Now, the fact that I sound like us, I sound Australian. On the telephone, people will speak to me. I could be John, Robert, David, Stephen, And if I said I was John, Robert, David, or Stephen, and when they met me, they'd go, "You don't look like a Robert, John, David, or Stephen. You sound like a Robert, John, David, or Stephen, but you look like a Muhammad or an Abdullah or a Nasser." So I sound like us, but I look like them. But with that AAA status comes a responsibility. Because as I went through, as I say in my video, there's 8 Palestinians, and apartheid Israel creates those designations because apartheid Israel controls my life, even though I'm a AAA Palestinian, all the way to number 8, which is somebody in Gaza today, controlling their lives and genociding them. So when I talk about hope as a AAA Palestinian who went to his first protest in the womb of his mother, my first protest, and each of my children has been to a protest in their mother's womb, and we buried my father, God rest his soul, in strange soil because he is a 4th-class Palestinian, disconnected, born, but Western citizenship, but doesn't have a Hawiyah, so can't go back. All the layers of disaster that apartheid Israel oppresses us by. That in my mid-50s, that I buried my father, and as he was in the last months before he died, there was a protest that must have been 2006 invasion, Gaza. He was not well enough to go to the demonstration, but he saw my brothers and I loading up his grandkids into the car, the kafirs, the flags, and saw us drive to the demonstration. That he died knowing that we hadn't forgotten. He died knowing not only his children, but his grandchildren hadn't forgotten. That the protests in 1982, Sahil, I spoke as a 12-year-old to to 6 people at a rally. I was related to all of them. This past 7 months, 201 days, 202 days, I've spoken all over this country at rallies of 50, 80, 100,000 people. So when I think about hope, the mask that Israel has been able to wear, the impunity it has enjoyed as a normal country, the veneer of civility, we call it, the veneer of civility, even though as Palestinians, the global South knows what a ethno-nationalist, racist, colonial state Israel is. But the global South doesn't have power. But in the West, they see Israel and they think Scarlett Johansson. They see Israel and they go, plucky little state in a hostile territory. They see Israel, they won Eurovision. They see Israel and they think white. And they think white in Germany and France, in the UK, in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and Australia. All of the racist colonizers, all of the racist settler colonies. The mask is off. The hypocrisy that is the double standard of international law that was exposed October 8, that everything we knew that is available to us from a diplomatic lever, from an economic lever that we applied to Russia vis-a-vis Ukraine, that we immediately said wasn't available to the Palestinians when Israel went in. The duplicity and hypocrisy exposed. And it wasn't us telling the world. I mean, we were out there shouting, Sam, yeah? But how many of us is there, really? The streets are full. The streets are full. Whether it's the UK, hundreds of thousands every day. We're in Australia, look at Columbia University and Yale and MIT and all over the States, all of the encampments there. I've just come from an encampment from our most prestigious brownstone, Melbourne University. It's the highest rated university in the Southern Hemisphere, where we have an encampment in the middle of that colonial institution. And overwhelmingly, the crew that is there are kids and they're white. And this is the most prestigious school in Australia. These are not nutbag lefties, go get a job. These are children of privilege, yeah? This is tomorrow's leaders. These are children that have access to resources that will get the opportunity of generational wealth transfer, that will be the power and decision makers of tomorrow. Yeah. And so the future is here. The future is here. And so the hope in the massacre and the devastation and the horror that is a genocide, the despicability of Western complicity in giving Israel the diplomatic, the military, and the media coverage to allow them to perpetuate a genocide. They talk about 40,000 dead. We know the number is 100,000.
Oh, we know it's beyond that.
We know
way beyond that, yeah.
People, when you wipe out an entire building, nobody said there was 100 people in there. How do you count them? If there's nobody left to say, I'm missing my brother, when everybody died, when you count the fact that there's no functioning hospital system, that people with injuries that might otherwise have been treatable, they will die for lack of medication, they will die for infection, let alone starvation, etc. That this can go on. That President Biden and the Democratic Party are like, you mean we're going to lose an election to Donald Trump because some brown people got killed? They just haven't got it. The rug has been pulled out from underneath them. So when we talk about hope, and I know that 40 odd years ago, I spoke and Reagan, you should know, we support the PLO. This was the chant, it wasn't free, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. There were, all of the new chants that have developed and evolved along the journey. The hope is that the catastrophe and massacre and genocide, that sacrifice has awakened a people, that this is the new Vietnam, that this is the fight against segregation in America, that this is the anti-apartheid struggle, that this is for so many people an understanding that the connection between, student debt and capitalism and Western hegemony and empire and all of the things that are evil, that all focus into this patriarchal white supremacy, which is Zionism, that its downfall is a liberation movement, that Palestine liberates us all. And that when we used to speak about that, Sahel, to our families and to our cousins and to a rally that was, a mirror of ourselves because it was just our family members, that in fact others are saying it, and others with power and influence, and others with advantage. And because Sahel, as well as I do, in white space, when white people say what we say, it gets accepted, and it's shocking. We get dismissed as brown people, and the fact that our narrative, a one democratic state, our narrative that Israel is a settler colonial state, our narrative that Israel is apartheid, our narrative that the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign is the way to bring Israel to Wasrael, strip it of the impunity it has enjoyed. When our narrative is being communicated by Bob and Mary, by Kevin and Karen, they can't undo that. They can dismiss Nasser and Zahir and Fatma and Layla, but they can't dismiss Bob and Mary and Kevin and Karen.
Bless you. That was, I got a bit emotionally absorbed in what you were saying, because heaven knows we can relate. I can certainly relate. Because when I arrived, I went to like summer school in the United Kingdom in 2010. And at the time, you would say you're Palestinian, and maybe like teachers and like a few people like would know, but a lot of people simply wouldn't know. And at the time, I think it was Gilad Shalit was in Gaza, and there was that whole protest movement to get him out. And that was like infinitely more visible than like anything to do with Palestinians.
Yeah.
By comparison, I believe something that has been to our strength, thankfully, as Palestinians and advocates for Palestinian rights from the river to the sea, is the fact that we have better organizational capabilities. Maybe it's because we Palestinians, at least from my opinion, maybe this is a lesson we've learned from the Nakba, because something that's taught to us all the time is, oh, we were illiterate. Oh, like everything will betray you, but the only thing that will never betray you is your education, which is part of why, like, I was chatting with some friends, and they were shocked that, oh, the literacy rate among like Palestinians in Gaza is 99%. And Gaza, which is also true of Palestinians elsewhere, has like one of the highest rates of PhD candidacy and PhD graduates on Earth.
Yep. One of the highest. The last time I saw an actual stat, it was only the Armenians that were higher than us.
Who also
We
have
were
like a similar, cultural background.
Well,
Of
not
like
just a similar cultural
overperforming.
background, but
Yeah.
a disconnection to the land, a struggle for self-determination, oppression, a genocide they have to deal with. Like the parallels between our struggle and the Armenians are absolute.
Yeah. And this is especially seen in Jerusalem, with the attempt to seize the Armenian quarter. and Judaize it and remove the Armenians from it.
Mhm.
But yeah, like fast forward, I think a lesson we've learned, thankfully, from the Nakba is we can be oppressed, but we cannot be illiterate. Like we cannot afford to be. So
Yeah.
to the Zionist movement and to the powers that be, the danger isn't a Palestinian who like can't speak, so to speak, like can't talk about their rights and explain why they believe what they do. The danger is a Palestinian who can, which is unfortunately why we see what we do all across Western countries and especially in the United States and Germany. What hopes do you have, as since we're both advocates for the decolonization and liberation of Palestine, what hopes do you have for this to happen and how it can happen?
Mm-hmm. So let me talk in the context of Australia. So and what that might look like globally, and perhaps it's similar to your understanding of your exposure to Western Europe and to the States, Sahan.
Mhm.
I'm, as I said earlier, in my mid-50s there, and my father was, obviously very active Palestinian. Um, there's a generation gap. We got a big influx of Palestinians after the first Gulf War. They came from the Gulf. Um, uh, Most of the Arabs in Australia are Lebanese, and then a sprinkling of Syrians and Jordanians, Iraqis, etc. And obviously, as most of them, as Iraq got democracy, people came out of Syria, of course, as well.
Mhm.
So the Palestinian community is not big here.
Mhm.
And so for a long time, our movement was led by, you know, uh, Hezb al the Syrian National Socialist Party. It was led by Baathists. It was led by, all of the different factions that have used Palestine as a bridge for their own political agendas. Um, uh, but there was a Palestinian community, and my father did his very best to unite us and to get us on message. And for much of the 70s and 80s, everybody was Fatah. Yeah, so it was pretty easy to get us all onto that one page. Oslo happened, and that ended Fatah for my father and our family. Um, um, he could never have, he used to say, nobody ever said, no, and back in the 80s, nobody's saying cut South Africa into a black state and a white state. It just beggars belief that we would even suggest or accept that Palestine should be an Arab state and a Jewish state. Um, after, so that's 91 First Gulf War through to the generation behind me, the 40s, they were children of Gulf War, or they came to Australia and the kids were 8 or 10. And I'm very, very disappointed. I continue to voice my disappointment to these people. They came to Australia and went, forget Palestine. Now, they're not AAA Palestinian because they're not born here. So they don't
Mhm.
sound like us. And they've got citizenship, but because they held citizenship from somewhere else, they can get stripped of that citizenship. But they have enough privilege to be in the West to do something. And there's a responsibility if you're AAA to help the number 8.
Amazing.
You don't get to call yourself Palestinian and have a Western passport and the opportunity and the safety of the roof on your head and a fridge being full and not have a responsibility to do. And that responsibility may come at a cost. It may cost your job. It may cost you opportunity. It may cost you influence or membership. It might cost you, who knows, whatever. But it's still less than anybody in Gaza has paid, whatever it might be. but that comes with the responsibility. Well, there's a generation, at least one, possibly two, between me and my brothers and our next crew of active Palestinians. Well, since October 7, the 20-something-year-old Palestinians, I mean, I've always, as best as I could, endeavored to create the space, and we do youth internships, we do youth training, we do all sorts of youth programs to upskill our kids to understand, from Palestine 101 to how to speak to media training, how to talk about Palestine at university, all sorts of stuff. But the uplift in understanding, the uplift in ownership of our 20-year-olds, yeah, I'm in my 50s, but our 25-year-olds is awesome. And their unwavering commitment to a full Palestine. None of that Oslo bullshit. To a full Palestine, a decolonized Palestine, a one-state democratic state Palestine is, something that I didn't imagine I would see. And, for the first time in my advocacy life, and, as far as I'm concerned, you can be, Ghada Karami, she said, as a Palestinian, you can be an architect, a doctor, a lawyer, an artist, a painter, a pianist, but your first job is advocate. Yeah. So it doesn't matter what you're doing here, you're an advocate too. At the same time, you've got two full-time jobs as a Palestinian, whatever pays the bills and advocate. That these 20-year-olds are fierce and strong and empowered and understand their democratic right and are unwavering, fierce Palestinians. And they're unconquerable. Just as our people are unconquerable in Gaza, these ones, my father, God rest his soul, he was always, the worm can never fly, he would say about these people, cursing them. The kids, mashallah alayhum, they are just fire. So when we talk about hope, and I expect and I hope that that's, look, certainly some of the, on Instagram, and I see the movements, I think her name is Nisreen Kadawi in New York. She can't be more than 25, 26. Talk about the hijabi woman that was in California that was supposed to do the valedictorian speech that got denied her in the US. And you look at the overwhelmingly young 20-something-year-old Palestinians and majority women, like, there's no worse thing on earth today than trying to sell that Zionism crap. There's no worse thing in the world. I said at my speech today at the university, there used to be a day when on your CV, you would say, on your resume, I did this as an internship and I did this. And you would slip in there that you did it, Jewish youth camp or a Zionist leadership thing, because there was every chance that somebody might see that and would think there's an opportunity. This kid might be connected to a network I could use by employing them, and or maybe the HR person will see this and they might be a Jew or a Zionist. There's no question, nobody's putting that on their resume tomorrow. Nobody is outwardly, proudly saying I'm a Zionist.
There are
And
certain, yeah.
that is something that should fill us all with hope. The domino has been pushed. Just, is it 10 dominoes or is it 100? It's over. Was rail.
I mean, what's a, a message you would have to both Palestinians, especially those in Gaza, but you can also include like Palestinians and like the West Bank, 48 diaspora, and possibly even to Israelis. What message do you have in mind involving like our
Well,
emancipation
let's start
liberation?
with let's start with the Israelis, because uh, it's important for them to understand that whilst they are standing on our throats, that they're trapped. There is no peace when you are an oppressor. There is no peace. You are trapped just as we are. You might feel that you're free, but you can't go anywhere. You're trapped. Your foot is stuck on our head, on our throats, but you can't go anywhere either. You're not free. There's no freedom while you're oppressing. Number one. Number two, you're a settler colonizer. The language of settler colonialism is violence. The problem with that mindset is you attribute it to everybody else. Because you're a racist, because you're hate-filled, because you're violent, you believe that everybody is. In the world, if you wanted an example of why hasn't an indigenous people taken up violence against their oppressors, the greatest example is the United States, where 400 years of slavery, of disconnection, of beatings, of rapes, of theft, of prison industrial complex. Every mass shooting you hear about in the United States is a crazy white guy. But the person who should be most angry is the black kid that didn't meet his dad because his dad was imprisoned for, some minor charges, but the 3-strike rule meant his father spent the entire child's life in jail. That they lived in a red zoned area that meant that they couldn't get a home loan and the school was underfunded. And, because of that, his mum couldn't get a real job or a good job. And so they ate fast food, and that gave them a higher chance of diabetes. And because there were drugs in the thing, all of the systematic racism that is white supremacy, just like Zionism, that should fill, and theoretically, a black man with the level of anger at injustice, and they can get guns, Sahab. Like, there are more guns than there is human beings in the United States.
Yeah.
That when somebody goes quote unquote postal, it's the white dude. It's not a black guy that goes into a white church and kills white people and goes, this is for 400 years of slavery and the fact that you stole my great-great-grandfather from Ghana. It's the white people that do that. That if you go back to Palestine, when they've got their foot on our throats, because they are settler colonial racists, that foot of oppression is there because they want to be superior, but also they're scared that if they let us out, that we will do to them what they did to us. What they don't understand is that indigenous people don't get strength from guns. Indigenous people don't get strength from weaponry. Indigenous people get strength from the land that is theirs. They get strength from the connection to the dirt that their thousands of years of ancestors are buried in and that they toiled and fed and ate from. This is our strength. I saw an interesting tweet. Have a look where we are, 202 days, a nuclear armed state with all of the support of the US and aircraft carriers and battleships, and Biden has been, and Richie Sunak's been, and Macron's been, and what's his name? Blinken has been maybe 10 days, 10 times now. I mean, like, he's almost living there. With all that and non-stop military transportation, 20 or 30,000 Hamas guys with armaments from Czechoslovakia, from the Soviet era, RPGs and Kalashnikovs, tops 30,000 of them, they still haven't beaten Hamas. All of that technology, you still haven't beaten Hamas. That if there was a magic time. We could go back to the 1600s when the battles between the red coats and the blue coats, Napoleon and whomever, was on a field, and they would go, and that would be cavalry. And then that was the archers and muskets and cannons. And then at whatever time, the war ended at nighttime, and they went, we lost more men than you won the battle. That's how it was, wars weren't to the point of attrition as they are, post World War I, and what we're seeing now, a genocide. That if it was a level playing field, Hamas, not all of the Palestinians, because we know Hamas isn't all of the Palestinians. Hamas and the IOF, Hamas would win by lunchtime. Hamas would win by lunchtime in an equal field. And the thing that they don't understand, and maybe they do, but it would make their heads flip, is that at dinner time, our mums would cook for them. Our mums would cook for them because our language, the language of indigenous people, is love. The language of indigenous people is love. When they first came to Palestine, not the Palestinian Jews, but the Jews of Europe. My grandmother was a wet nurse for a Jewish family. Yeah. They've opened up rooms, they've put people into houses, of course, there was no question that these people who were fleeing the world, that we opened up our homes. This is who we are. And when I say who we are, it's not unique to Palestinians, but it's the truth of indigenous people, whose language is love, not violence. That you should understand, Israelis, that taking your foot off our throats liberates you as well as us. And then when we are equal, you can put your gun away, because we're not here to kill you. That's stuck in your head. Decolonize your brain as well as we're going to decolonize the land. To our people, our heroic people who are unbroken, steadfast, who are the exemplar of pride, of dignity, of strength. They are the exemplar for all oppressed people on the earth, our heroes of Gaza. You lift our hearts. You honor us. We hope that we are one day worthy of you. We hope that one day we'll be worthy of you. We will never forget you. We love you. We appreciate you. We're so proud of you. And to the rest of our Palestinians, look to them and endeavor to be half as good. So many of our Palestinians across the world, I'm ashamed to say, many of them, when they breathe the air of diaspora, they forget Palestine. It's a shame on them, because our people deserve so much better. To our people in Palestine who remain steadfast, unconquered, and unbroken, I thank you. And I hope and I pray that your freedom will happen sooner than ever. And I promise you, our victory is closer than ever before.
I mean, that's all I had to ask. I don't have anything else to add or say. You couldn't have said it better. May God bless Palestine. May we all be liberated and meet in a unified Palestine. I mean,
inshallah.